Young and the Restless, spoilers full. Diane had reached the kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. It was not physical fatigue alone, though, that lived in her too, in the heaviness behind her eyes and the stiffness in her shoulders every time she tried to hold herself together for one more day. This was a deeper collapse, the kind that comes after trust is broken in slow motion. What made Jack's betrayal so devastating was not simply that he had hurt her, but that he had done it after becoming the one place where she had allowed herself to feel safe again. Diane had built so much of her fragile peace around the belief that whatever storms came from Genoa City, whatever poison Victor poured into the air, whatever whispers and schemes circled her name, Jack would still be the man who saw her. Clearly. He would still be the one who chose her. When that illusion cracked, something inside Diane cracked with it. She was no longer grieving a single lie or a single mistake. She was grieving the humiliation of having believed in stability at all. In her mind, Jack's failure was no longer personal. It became proof that trust itself was a foolish gamble. Once that thought settled into her heart, it spread everywhere. If Jack could betray her, then anyone could. If the man who had promised understanding could falter when it mattered most, then why should she open the door for anyone else? That was the state Michael walked into when he found her. He did not arrive with flowers, pity, or the sort of polished sympathy Diane had come to resent. He came carrying something far more dangerous and far more useful, the truth, or at least the ugliest pieces of it. Diane had spent days drowning in her own interpretations, replaying Jack's choices over and over until the pain turned shapeless. Michael forced that pain into focus. He laid out Victor's involvement with a level of cold precision that made Diane's anger sharpen into something almost surgical. He explained the manipulation, the pressure, the twisted architecture of Victor's plans, and slowly Diane began to see that the betrayal she had experienced was not as simple as one man losing faith in his wife. It was uglier than that. More contaminated. Jack had still failed her, and nothing Michael said erased that, but the context changed everything. Victor had not merely stood on the sidelines enjoying the damage, he had engineered the conditions for that damage using old wounds, family pressure, and psychological leverage in the way only Victor Newman could. Diane listened, not like a woman being comforted, but like a woman gathering evidence after a crime. Her pain did not lessen, but it became more directed. The random ache inside her narrowed into rage. Not because Jack was innocent, but because Diane now understood how thoroughly she had been surrounded by manipulation while she was still trying to fight for her marriage with bare hands. There was something almost cruel about the timing of Michael's honesty. Diane had spent so long feeling isolated that being truly seen even for one evening nearly undid her. Michael was not naive. He knew exactly how broken the situation was, and he was not giving Diane false hope about Jack, about Victor, or about the family wars that never truly ended. What he offered her instead was clarity, and for Diane, clarity felt intimate. It felt more intimate than love promises, more intimate than loyalty speeches, more intimate even than forgiveness. In a town where everyone hid behind half-truths and strategic silence, Michael sitting across from her and naming the ugliness plainly felt like a rare act of respect. Diane did not have to pretend with him. She did not have to soften her bitterness, or act like the bigger person, or perform grace for anyone's benefit. Michael saw the rage in her and did not flinch. He saw the humiliation, the grief, the bruised pride, and instead of urging her to rise above it, he allowed her to feel all of it. That was what made the evening dangerous from the beginning. Not attraction, not seduction, not some impulsive spark that came out of nowhere. The danger came from emotional recognition. Diane was raw, and Michael was the first person in a long time who did not ask her to bandage herself before speaking. Dinner was never meant to become anything significant. At least that was the lie both of them could have told if anyone had asked. It started in the quiet way these things often do, under the respectable cover of concern and practical companionship. A table, a bottle of wine, low lighting that made the room feel removed from the rest of Genoa City, from the Abbott house, from Victor's shadow, from all the public versions of themselves they had worn for years. Diane had no appetite at first, but the act of sitting still with someone who expected nothing from her had its own kind of gravity. Michael did not push. He did not interrogate. He let the conversation breathe. It drifted from facts to feelings, from Victor's schemes to Jack's weaknesses, from Diane's anger to Michael's own quiet disillusionment with the endless damage powerful men justified in the name of family pride and control. The wine softened the edges, but it was not the wine that changed the atmosphere. It was the mutual exhaustion. Two people who had spent too many years cleaning up emotional wreckage for others suddenly found themselves speaking in tones stripped of performance. Diane's bitterness, once tightly contained, began to spill out more freely. She admitted how foolish she felt, how deeply insulted she was by Jack's weakness. How sick she was of being judged for every survival choice she had ever made while men like Victor moved across the chessboard destroying lives and still called themselves protectors. Michael listened with the attentiveness of a man who understood that fury can sometimes be more honest than tears. And when Diane's anger reached its peak, what startled even her was not how fiercely she spoke, but how much she wanted to keep speaking to him. Michael did not offer the kind of comfort that diminishes pain by reframing it. He did something more dangerous. He validated the depth of it. He acknowledged that what had been done to her was cruel. He acknowledged that Jack's love, whatever remained of it, had not been strong enough at the moment. Diane needed it most. He acknowledged that Victor's behavior was monstrous, not merely controlling or difficult, but deeply destructive. Diane had not realized how starved she was for someone to say those things aloud. Every nerve in her had been preparing for dismissal, for caution, for reminders to be reasonable. Instead, Michael gave her a kind of emotional permission. That permission loosened something inside her that had been held under pressure for too long. The more openly angry she became, the calmer he remained, and in that contrast, she found strange relief. His steadiness did not feel cold. It felt safe. The room shifted. The dinner stopped feeling like a meeting between allies and started feeling like a refuge built for two people who should have known better than to need each other that much in a single evening. The kiss, when it came, was not romantic in the polished cinematic sense. It did not rise out of joy or hope. It came out of collapse, out of loneliness, out of the unbearable closeness that grows when one wounded person lets another see too much. Diane had spent so much time feeling discarded that being looked at with tenderness again shook her more than she expected. Michael, for all his intelligence and restraint, was not immune to that pull. He had watched Diane suffer. He had watched her claw for dignity in a town determined to reduce her to her past. He had just sat across from her as she laid bare the wreckage of her marriage and the fury consuming her. There are moments when boundaries erode, not because people forget who they are, but because they are too aware of who they are in that moment, lonely, flawed, grieving, and desperate for something human. Their kiss carried that desperation. It was not triumphant. It was not even especially gentle at first. It was searching, almost startled by its own existence, as if both of them felt the exact instant when comfort crossed into hunger. Diane should have pulled away. Michael should have remembered every reason not to do this. But pain has a way of making the forbidden feel less like sin and more like oxygen. The kiss deepened because neither of them wanted to return to the version of the evening where they were still only speaking around the emptiness. What followed was not some glamorous betrayal wrapped in fantasy. It was messier than that, and more believable because of it. Diane did not suddenly forget Jack, nor did Michael stop understanding the consequences. If anything, that awareness followed them into every touch. There was grief inside, the intimacy grief, and anger, and a reckless need to feel wanted before the night ended and reality returned. Diane, who had felt judged and doubted and emotionally abandoned, found herself clinging to the one thing that was unmistakable in that moment. Michael wanted her, not as an obligation, not as a strategic alliance, not as a woman whose name carried scandal, but as a woman standing in front of him wounded, and vivid, and alive. Michael, in turn, was not simply taking advantage of a vulnerable situation, though the moral risk of that could not be ignored. He was also surrendering to a truth of his own, one he likely had not intended to confront. Somewhere between defending Diane, understanding her, and admiring the force of her resilience, his concern had become something warmer and far more dangerous. Once they crossed that line, there was no elegant way to retreat from it. The bedroom was not the setting for passion detached from consequence. It was the final room in a long corridor of emotional unraveling. What happened there was the physical expression of everything that had been building all evening: rage needing release, loneliness needing witness, betrayal needing a counterweight, however temporary and however flawed. So did Michael and Diane really do this? In the emotional logic of a story like this, yes, they absolutely could. Not because it is noble and not because it is clean, but precisely because it is neither. That is what gives the possibility its power. Diane is not in a place where she would choose peace over impulse. She has been hurt too deeply, and her sense of judgment is clouded by heartbreak, humiliation, and the intoxicating relief of finally being understood. Michael is not a reckless man by nature, but even careful men break when they are pulled into the orbit of raw emotion and unresolved desire. What makes this scenario convincing is that it does not ask the audience to believe in a great love story appearing overnight. It asks them to believe in human weakness, emotional vulnerability, and the way loneliness can distort even intelligent people's choices. That is far more realistic. People do not always betray out of calculated malice. Sometimes they betray because pain makes recklessness feel like truth. Sometimes one night becomes the place where months of repression, resentment, and longing finally collide. The real fallout would begin the morning after. That is where the weight of such a decision would truly reveal itself. Diane might wake with a brief, almost intoxicating sense of vindication before shame and confusion begin to creep in. Not because she owes Jack unquestioned loyalty after being hurt, but because she knows exactly how this will look, exactly how quickly Genoa City weaponizes private mistakes, exactly how eager certain people would be to reduce her all over. Again. She would have to confront the possibility that for one night of comfort she had complicated her position beyond repair. Michael, too, would not emerge untouched. He is too thoughtful, too aware of relational landmines to simply shrug off what happened. He would understand that the line between comfort and exploitation is thin when one person is grieving, and that even if Diane wanted him, even if he wanted her, the moral ambiguity would not disappear just because the connection was real. He would have to ask himself whether he had been Diane's safe place or her escape route, and the cruel truth is that he may have been both. Jack's role in all this would only make the entire situation more explosive, because once Diane understands more fully how Victor manipulated events, her pain toward Jack becomes even more tangled. She may begin to see his weakness with greater clarity, but clarity does not automatically restore love. In fact, sometimes it kills the last illusion holding love together. Jack may not have intended to destroy Diane, but he still failed the test that mattered. That kind of failure is hard to forgive, especially for a woman who has spent so much of her life fighting to be seen as more than her worst mistakes. If Diane ends up in Michael's arms even for one night, it would not simply be an act of revenge. It would be the symptom of a much larger emotional collapse. It would say that something essential in her bond with Jack had broken before she ever touched another man. Jack would certainly experience it as betrayal if he learned the truth, but Diane would likely see it through a different lens. She would see it as the inevitable outcome of being pushed past the point of emotional endurance, of being abandoned just long enough for someone else to step into the silence.